And welcome back, everybody. So for this video, I decided to make this recap because it was over my first ever win against a Grandmaster over the board in a classical game. So I thought it'd be pretty cool to do some live commentary over it. So yeah, let's get into it. So to kind of set the scene a little bit, this was a classical game. I had the black pieces. Time control was 90 plus 30, meaning that we each started off with 90 minutes on our clock. And every time I make a move, 30 seconds gets added to my time. So he started off with the move e4. I responded with the Sicilian, c5, knight f3, going for either an open Sicilian or a Rossolimo with bishop b5. I played knight c6, and now, of course, there are two moves, d4, bishop b5. There are also some sidelines with c3, going for some delayed Alapin or even d3 maybe. But he goes for the main line, d4. So now I take, knight takes d4. And here there are a lot of moves for black. Knight f6 going into the potentially a 4 knights, g6. But here I played the move e5, signaling that I either want to go for a Sveshnikov or a Kalashnikov, depending on what I play. And the nice thing about the move e5 is that it kind of clarifies the central tension between the knights a little bit, because it forces white to make a decision as the pawn is attacking the knight. So he plays the main theoretical move, knight b5. It's funny, actually, because in this opening, the rest of the knight moves, knight f3, knight b3, knight f5, knight e2, they're all not very good. And so there's really only one theoretical option, and that's knight f5. And here I decided to play d6, and this is the Kalashnikov variation. And the idea is I'm simply preventing the knight from coming to d6. So on the previous move, white was threatening to play knight d6 check, which would have forced me to give up my bishop. So I'm preventing that with the move d6. And now there's a couple main lines here. There's knight 1 c3, which is the main move, developing the knight, supporting the pawn, and supporting this knight over here. And then there's also the other move c4, going for like a Maroczy-Bind type structure where you try and control this d5 square a lot. And essentially you try and limit black's central counterplay by preventing the move d5 later in the game. But instead of that, this is where the game gets interesting. My opponent played none of those moves and instead played bishop e3. Now, this looks like a normal developing move at first, but the reason why it's not super popular is because it kind of lets black develop relatively freely. Moves like c4 and knight c3 try to have a grip over the pawn or over the square on d5, and so it essentially tries to give black a hard time in the center. But the move bishop e3 looks like a pretty innocuous developing move, and actually already at this point we're not even following that many games anymore. In the Masters database, there's only about 117 games that have happened in this position out of the thousands that have been reached in this variation. So bishop e3, I continue to develop normally, knight f6, so I'm kind of already thinking on my own feet here. And the idea of playing this bishop e3 move is to induce the move knight f6 and then play bishop g5, which is now establishing a pin on the knight. And the reason why he did this is now my knight, of course, doesn't really attack this pawn anymore, and it also doesn't control d5 anymore because of the pin. So what I had calculated here was this relatively forcing line. The main move, according to theory, is bishop e6, but I didn't know that during the game. Instead, I played the move queen a5 check, which is also maintains equality for black, but my whole idea was to eventually take this pawn on e4. So there's a few ways that white can respond to this check. If they block with the pawn, I'm simply just going to take on e4, and of course black is very happy there. If they block with the bishop, now my idea was simply to actually just go back queen d8. And if they play bishop g5, queen a5, and there we go. I mean, I get a draw with the GM and 9 moves. So of course I can be happy with that. So I wasn't hesitating to go into that line. And if they block with either knight d2 or knight c3, then I can still take the pawn on e4 because that knight would be pinned. So instead, that leaves them with the only move, which is queen d2. This is, of course, the most challenging line. And here I play knight takes e4 because my queen is defended by the knight, and now I'm attacking the queen and the bishop at the same time. So queen takes a5 is forced, knight takes a5, and now bishop e3, getting the bishop out of the way. I should mention here also that after queen a5 and knight a5, I spent a little bit of time looking at this knight c7 move, and it looks like white is completely winning here because you're going to win this rook on a8. But the thing is, after king d7 and knight takes a8, I'm just going to take his bishop, and this knight is actually trapped. So in the next few moves, I'm going to play b6, I'm going to play bishop b7, and this knight will eventually be lost. And so at that point, I would have a rook for 2 pieces, and black is, of course, cleanly better there. So after knight a5, bishop b3 was played, and now I had to spend a lot of time to make a decision. So at the moment, it looks like black is doing very well because black is up a pawn, but the issue is that white is immediately going to win their pawn back. And the issue is I can't play something like a6 because white is still threatening to play knight c7 check. And now, because this bishop is not on pre anymore, knight c7 is a far greater threat. And so really the only 2 moves to consider for black here are king d7 and king d8. And I spent about half an hour here deciding between these 2 moves. Now, king d8 looks like a very normal move, but actually it's the worst of the 2. Because after bishop takes a7, let's say I play like knight c6 attacking the bishop, now they're going to play bishop b6 check, and then the knight will come in. And this presents a lot of problems for black. So if I play king e8, there's of course knight c7 check, picking up the rook right away. And even if I go like king d7, knight c7 anyway, and this is still like really bad for black because I have to play like rook a4, getting my rook out of the way, and this rook is getting kind of stuck after moves like b3. So I didn't really want to allow this, so instead in the game I played king d7. This is the best move, maintaining equality. And just if you're curious about the edging evaluation, king d8 is actually +2 for white. So king d7. Now he plays bishop takes a7, which I saw, and here my idea was to play d5. This is the best move, expanding in the center. And essentially black's goal here is to kind of relieve the pressure of white's active pieces. So if you look at this position, white hasn't really developed anything. Everything is still in the back rank except for this knight and the bishop. And one of my ideas with the move d5 is not just taking central space, but also to play the move bishop c5 and trade off this, this dark squared bishop. Because once I manage to do that, this knight will not be able to create any threats on its own, and black should be very comfortable there. So a4 was played, and now before playing bishop c5, I decided that my knight is already done doing its job here on a5, and he's also threatening to play b4 and at some point and kick out my knight. I know it's hanging at the moment, but there's a potential idea of c3 and b4. So I decided to just retreat the knight and attack the bishop with tempo. And so we played bishop b6. Now I play bishop c5, forcing a trade of the dark squared bishops, takes. And so how does black continue in this position? Well, it was clear to me that I was pretty comfortable in this position. Black has the full center. The knights are doing very well. And really, the only thing that black needs to do is figure out how to get this light squared bishop out, and then figure out what to do with the rooks. So after knight takes c5, I'm already creating a threat on the a4 pawn. So b3 was played, and now I simply just continue with king e7. One of the most natural moves, trying to get the bishop out to like either f5 or e6. And one brief thing I had to calculate here was the move knight c7, which looks like a fork of the rook and the pawn. And if I simply move my rook, then he's going to take this pawn with check, and I will basically have lost all of my advantage. But what I saw here was that I had the move knight b4, which actually attacks the pawn on c2 and threatens like another counter fork. So if he takes this rook on a8, then I play knight takes c2 check, and then pick up this rook on a1. I'm going to be winning the pawn on b3. This is, of course, completely winning for black. So in this position, the move knight a3 is forced because he has to defend the pawn somehow, and he may as well develop a knight. And here I simply just played rook a5, getting my rook out of the way. Rook b8 is also another move, but the problem is it's kind of too passive because my rook isn't really doing anything when it's stuck behind the pawn and the bishop. So I played rook a5. And now he played the move bishop e2, trying to simply finish his development and get castled. Here I played bishop d7, getting my bishop out. Bishop f5 was also something I considered. Both of these are very good moves. But I played bishop d7 because I wanted to control the b5 square, because I anticipated that this was a square that he eventually wanted to put one of his pieces on, whether it be a knight or even one of the bishops. So he castled, and now I played the move knight e4. And this is where I'm already trying to claim the initiative and set up a bunch of threats. And knight e4 is not just a good centralizing move, it also threatens the move rook c5, which attacks the pawn on c2 and the knight on c7. And so he has to prevent that, which is why he plays the move knight b5. And now my rook cannot really cross over and go to c5. So instead what I did was I simply just brought my other rook. And now I'm making a nearly unstoppable threat on this pawn on c2, which is why c4 is basically the only move to save the pawn. And here, it's actually a really instructive moment. A lot of you might be tempted to trade on c4 right away, right? Because it looks like opening up the position will benefit black. But the issue is taking on c4 is actually pretty bad, because they'll just play like either knight takes c4 or bishop takes c4, and I don't really have much control over the center anymore. And white's pieces are kind of getting out, and black's grip has kind of reduced. So now I play the move d4, expanding in the center, and also creating my own passed pawn. And the reason why this is nice is because in the future, with this knight on b4, I'm starting to play d3 and d2, and this will be pretty dangerous for white. So now my opponent plays f4, and this is a very logical move, trying to kind of dislodge my central pawns. If I take on f4, this is already quite bad, because rook takes f4 will be played. This knight has to move, and then I'll be losing the pawn on d4. But instead, what I played in the game was d3. So I decided to just go for it and attack the bishop. So he plays bishop f3, and the move that I saw here was that I could play f5. And it looks like I'm just completely sacrificing a pawn on e5, but it's actually not that scary if white plays f takes e5, because you can simply either put your rook behind the pawn and try and push it, or in a couple moves you can play like knight c6 and knight takes e5, and black will be winning the pawn back very easily. So instead of f takes e5, my opponent he knew that he was worse here, and so he tried to complicate the position, which is actually a really good idea if you're trying to win from a losing position. And so he plays the move g4. And even though the computer deems this as a mistake, it's actually not that bad of a move. And the idea is just to create as much tension as possible between these pawns. Of course, I can't take because that would drop the knight on e4. So what I did instead was I played knight d2, which is a double attack of the knight and the bishop. Now he plays bishop takes b7, which attacks my rook, but at the same time I'm attacking his rook as well. So I take, he takes, and now the important question, which piece do you save? Do you save your bishop by taking the bishop on c8, or do you save the knight? And the answer is you should save the knight. Knight e3 is the best move, and actually is really the only move to keep advantage for black, because the knight is instrumental in pushing this pawn to d2 and d1. It's really important that the knight controls the promotion square, and also in the next move I can play e takes f4 and really anchor the knight in on e3. So he plays bishop takes d7 in this position, king takes d7, and I should also mention that if I played bishop takes c8, they just take my knight with the king, and now even though I can play e4 here and get two connected passed pawns, black is still slightly better here, but it's a lot harder to win because they can eventually get their king to e3 and then kind of get a blockade against these pawns. So it will take a longer time for black to convert this advantage. Okay, so back to the game, knight e3, takes, and now we get to the move king f2. So there are a bunch of good moves here. Knight takes g4 check is one of them. In the game I decided to play e takes f4 because I wanted to keep my knight on e3 so that I can still play d2 and d1. Pawn takes f5 was played, and now I simply just play d2, trying to promote my pawn to a queen, king e2, and because the promotion is unstoppable, he kind of just has to give up his rook for the knight and pawn. So king e2 was played, and actually the top engine move, according to Stockfish, is d1 bishop, but because I'm human, I made a queen, of course. Rook takes, knight takes, and king takes. And now, this is actually still not super easy to convert. because white has a knight and 2 pawns for a rook. And in actually a lot of endgames, the knight and 2 pawns will be better than the rook. But this case is different because, for one, the knights are not coordinated very well. This knight on a3 is really doing nothing, and it'll take a long time for white to really get it to any active square. And even though this knight is on an active square as well, it can't really do anything on its own. It needs the help of other pieces. And additionally, another important thing is that white's pawns cannot really advance very easily because this knight is actually doing a good job of stopping all of them. And the best move for black here is rook a6, because you kind of have to attack white's weaknesses on the king side, and so rook a6 and rook h6 is a nice maneuver to pick up the h2 pawn, which white can't really defend at all. So white played knight c2, trying to trade off their bad knight for my relatively good knight, but at this point the position is so winning that I'm okay with the trade, because after king c2 I just play rook h6, and now I'm just going to pick up this pawn on h2. And this position is already starting to become hopeless for white. So a5 was played. Really the only chance that white has is to try and make a queen somehow, but I play rook takes h2, king c3, which looks pretty natural to try and play king b4. I don't really blame my opponent for playing this move, even though the Stockfish thinks it's a mistake. But I play f3 in this position because what I realized was that even if he plays a6, I'll be able to play rook a2. And my rook is behind the pawn, and he can't really stop me from queening. So he plays king b4. The idea is to play knight a3 and then a7, a8 to kind of block the scope of my rook, but here I just played f2, because if he plays a7, I can just sack my rook and then queen. And actually, after he played a7, I didn't sack my rook, I played f1 queen, because what I also realized was the rook still controls the promotion square, so I don't need to give up the rook just yet. But he played knight a3 in this position to try and queen on the next move. And of course, a bunch of moves are winning here. One nice line is queen h1 to try and control the promotion square. But in the game, I played queen e1 check, king a4, and of course, yeah, many moves are winning. In the game, I played rook takes a3. This is probably one of the simplest moves, because after king takes a3, I play queen a5 check, and then I pick up this pawn. And this is just completely losing. Another fancy move here is queen a1, allowing white to promote, but you play rook takes a3 check, and then you pick up the queen like this. But yeah, after I played rook takes a3, my opponent resigned because, yeah, it's just hopeless. King takes a3, I win the pawn, and I'm easily going to convert this endgame by simply just pushing this pawn and making another queen. That's the easiest way. And yeah, with that, I won the game, and it wasn't a particularly flashy game, but there were actually a lot of key moments in this game to try and outplay my opponent in this endgame. And this goes to show that even though you trade queens super early in the game, there's still a lot of life left in these kinds of positions, and especially when you have an imbalance in pawn structure, like black having the entire center versus white having these flank pawns. There's still a lot of play left. And so, yeah, I was glad I secured the advantage in this game, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed the recap. See you later.